Welcome back to the Shelf Destruct podcast. We had a little bit of an impromptu summer break. We had Will was kind of moving. I was switching jobs. It was just, vacations, all the rest of it. And it was difficult to schedule some time to get together and talk about this book. But I'm very glad to be hanging out with you guys tonight. I've got a little whiskey sidecar that I made. I'm now a bartender. That's my job now. So I have been thrust headlong into the world of cocktails. And so now I try to make them at home, which is great. One more hobby that I need. What are y'all drinking tonight? Got anything good?
Nah, I had a tough week at work, so just challenging big stuff. So I kind of powered through. I'm not going to say the number because it's kind of embarrassing, but I just crushed a bunch of beers last night in like a 2.5 hour period, and then went to bed before midnight. So from like 7 or like 8 to 11, I was just pounding beers back to back. But I got a good night's sleep and I woke up feeling great. So, but because of that, tonight it's sparkling water for me.
I've actually been trying to drink a little bit less and work out a little bit more. I've been doing some just trying to treat myself a little bit. And I'm on a non-alcoholic beer right now. First time I've tried this really. It's
Great. So
it's a drink.
This promises to be
a
a riveting episode.
But I will say, I was thinking about this. I was drinking less, working out a little bit more, just, trying to take care of myself a little bit. And throughout this whole book, he's drinking and depressed and everything. And I was like, wow, I feel a lot better about my decisions right now.
Fair point.
But it was so tonight we're rocking the athletic just to see how it goes. But yeah, I mean it's not terrible. It's definitely not beer. I know it's not beer. It's
I can't believe it's not beer.
Yeah.
If you want one that'll definitely be able to trick your taste buds, Guinness Zero is the most accurate non-alcoholic beer I think I've ever had. It tastes exactly like Guinness.
I feel like every episode that we do ends up being us plugging Guinness for free.
Yeah. And here I was about to say, yeah, but you just can't do that to Guinness. You just just Guinness. It's almost sacrilegious to drink a Guinness Zero.
Well, it was made by monks, wasn't it, back in the day? So it is sacrilegious.
Also, let it be known, Jensen, that I have been sending you cocktail recipes on the side. So the fact that I'm drinking less doesn't mean that I'm not thinking about it. So
oh yeah, for
I don't
sure.
know. I don't know what that means, but
I don't know. We're getting older. We're trying to be more responsible. So taking some time off every now and then, I think it's good to kind of reset. Having a weekend with the boys, whether it be going to Furnace Fest or doing a cabin or something, but that's not as much fun going hard that weekend if you're always going hard.
Yeah,
you gotta kind of dry out. I had a boss way back in the day. It was every now and then you gotta dry out a little bit.
Get out of the water, put a towel on. Yeah.
While I'm proud of both of you, I just want to point out that it's almost like a damned if you do, damned if you don't scenario for me, because I think it was yesterday. I went to the gym and I lifted weights and I did a real, I was very proud of myself, and all that ended up doing was helping me to re-injure my previously injured shoulder, which has been giving me absolute hell for the last couple of days. So I just feel like you can't win in this life, guys. So I'm identifying a bit more with our with our main character of this novel tonight.
I have been very excited to talk with you guys about this book, and I've reserved all my comments. I didn't text you guys anything intentionally because This was one of my most divisive books. I could not. I'll just say from the top. I at first, maybe it topped it out. At first, I was about to be like, "This is worse than Moby Dick." I was about.
Interesting.
I was teetering there because I had a really hard time getting over this character, and I felt like the writing of like just his like swearing at first, it felt really gimmicky at first. Then as I got through the book, learned more about the his story, I started to see this as more of like a grief novel, and it came to a head. But there is a good bit of this book where it wasn't a hard read like Moby Dick was, but it was definitely I was wondering where it was going. So I'll leave it at that. But yeah, like that off the top, that's where my brain was at, and I want to hear what you guys think.
I can definitely understand like that feeling of being like, okay, what's happening? The way I like to think about it is, like when you go to the theater, like if like back in the day, I don't know if they still have it, like the THX deep note sound that starts out with like all this dissonance, and they actually programmed it for like all the notes to like move in like really in random directions, and then all of a sudden it resolves to this like beautiful like major chord. It's almost what this book felt like, where you just have all this kind of chaos building up, and then it like resolves at like the very end, and you can like see the picture clearly.
Yeah, it begins to come into focus a bit more towards the end for sure. I for whatever reason, and I don't know if you guys were the same way or not, but this novel is in a lot of curriculums, or at least it was in a lot of high school curriculums of our era when we were in high school, so 15 years ago or so. And for whatever reason, I just my courses in high school just jumped around this book. Oh, it looks like I've got a bad internet connection. Okay, I think I'm back. So
Taylor and his unstable internet connection.
Oh my God.
Yeah,
It's ridiculous.
I heard what you were saying. I didn't read it in high school either.
Yeah, for whatever reason, the courses that I had just skipped this book. Like I had one course that was on American literature, or at least like featured some, and we read The Great Gatsby and a couple other things, but this one just wasn't in there for some reason. But I knew there were people in my high school that were assigned this book, but for whatever reason I wasn't. So I missed it in high school. So I kind of my opinion of it was definitely not colored by having been forced to have read it when I was a teenager, So I kind of went into it unbiased and just kind of let it happen to me as it unfolded. And I think that what Will said is interesting, that like the swearing and the language that he uses, that kind of stream of consciousness, maybe is a little bit jarring. I kind of expected for it to be performative going in, that the main character was almost, the reminiscing was a bit performative in and of itself. So it wasn't quite as jarring as you described for me, but I definitely know what you're saying. It could almost, like if you went in with like no context, you could almost feel like it was trying too hard to be controversial,
Right. And I mean, I think agree again to kind of what I was saying at the very beginning of the book. I was like, what are we getting at here? Like, this just feels, like you said, performative. I had a really hard time just like caring about the character. Like just as like, his situation, he just was kind of like a little bit of a deadbeat in my opinion.
It seems like a burnout.
Then, yeah, just a burnout. And I was just like, I was like, sure, go on an adventure to New York. Like, great. Like, let's just go see what happens. Like I had a hard time just like rooting for him.
Uh-huh.
Then we get in obviously into later parts of the novel, which we can talk about, in this discussion. And I think there were a few pinnacle moments that started to place that like he is genuinely grieving. Like he is just a mess in every sense of the way. And even then, the cursing and everything, while it felt performative, suddenly I saw it as a defense mechanism. And, calling everybody phonies. And then even in the relationship that he had with his sister, the way he looks at her and he talks about, oh, it kills me. I started to see this other layer of him, which is probably the actual layer of him that wasn't just, it was just buried underneath like a ton of grief and a ton of posturing because he really didn't know how to exist in a world, that maybe he didn't feel like he was a part of 100%. So it came to a head. Now, all that to say, at some point we got to talk about this last chapter because
yeah, we will for sure.
It is, yeah, it's got quite a stop sign, but anyways, that was definitely what I felt.
So I was reading this novel the entire time trying to figure out, like, what was it that people like Mark David Chapman, like we had mentioned in Playworld, right? The previous novel that we just read together, the man who killed John Lennon was supposedly so influenced by this novel, and so many other like kind of hideous people within history have cited this novel as at least aesthetically interesting, or I was just trying to figure out how it was representative of that kind of mindset. So I was expecting this novel to be on its face a lot more controversial than it was. I mean, there's obviously the really famous South Park episode that you also can't avoid talking about, where it's kind of making fun of this whole idea, where I don't know if in the episode they actually mention that they're reading The Catcher in the Rye specifically, but I feel like they were. And all the boys kind of expect this novel to be super controversial because of the way people talk about it. And then they read it and they're like, oh, it's just like swearing and like people being like sad and saying cuss words, which isn't really all that interesting or titillating, right? And so they endeavor to write like a filthy novel that, ends up having all these literary critics talking about it and stuff. It's really funny. People just trying to read into something filthy in order to find meaning where there isn't intended to be any. So I kind of expected this novel to be a little bit more ridiculous or controversial on its face, and it really isn't. Like you were saying, Will, like it doesn't take very long before you realize that it's like this is just like a grief book, and a little bit more than that too. And I just don't want to give away some of the later revelations about Holden Caulfield that we find out later in the novel, just so that we'll have somewhere to arrive at the end of the talk. But I was kind of my first reading of it was just kind of colored by expectation of it being very controversial, which I mean it's also maybe in the context of the time that it came out, the language in and of itself, the foul language, would have been a bit more controversial than it feels to us now, because culture is very inundated with filthy language and teenagers talking about sex and all this kind of stuff that probably read a lot more like, whoa, back in the 40s or whatever than it does now. But that was just kind of where my mindset was originally. And yeah, I think I had a similar reaction to the South Park boys, where I was like, I don't know if I see how controversial this is, and I definitely don't see how it inspires an assassin,
Yeah, I mean, I'll second that too. Like, I think I went in because I had never read this. Again, this is for some reason also not in any of my curriculum growing up, although I know it was very common across most of like high school curriculum. But I'd only known the expectation of it being just, a well-known novel. Many people have read it. It's, a kind of a classic part of, should be a part of everyone's reading list at some point in your life. So I think I went in with a little bit of like heavy expectations, just to be more like enlightened in some degree, or, to just be like taken on a journey of some sorts. And, when it felt very normal, like, and I think that was what I had to, I had to reground myself a little bit. And as I was reading and just like try to like remove those expectations and just read. And that's when I said, once I got into it and I started, the revelations about him, like you mentioned, started coming out, I started seeing different sides of his personality and his reaction to certain experiences. He didn't just seem, you could tell he wasn't just he wasn't just a bad kid just doing controversial things to do that. He was like reacting in his own, he's dealing with his own emotions and seeing all these things. And yeah, it came to a head for sure. For sure. Jensen, what did you like? Generally, what did you think about this novel?
So the only thing I knew about it going in, and I love doing this whenever I can, like going into a book like completely blind. So like, I don't really pay much attention to the world. And so I knew that the book was a classic, and I'd heard people say some things about it being controversial, but it didn't like really like sit in my head whenever we started reading it. So I was able to kind of go in like fully blind. But I remember being about halfway through, and I was at lunch at work, and a coworker, we were talking about books because he's an avid reader as well. I told him what we were reading, and he was like, I can't stand Holden Caulfield. Whenever I was in high school, I like really felt like I identified with him, but like I read it again as an adult, and like he's a jackass. And I remember whenever he said I identified with him, or whenever I was a teenager reading this in high school, at first I was like, my mind went, how can you identify with this guy? But then like I thought about it again, like if I had read this book in high school, I don't know if my reading level would have allowed me to actually comprehend anything in high school, but I probably would have identified with him as well. Being a bit of a coward and a dropout, and not doing well in school, and kind of in general just kind of, it starts out just like him seeming like a bum that is cynical, and we don't really see until later that cynicism is actually is trauma. It's PTSD, and seeing how that fleshed out.
No, for sure. I had a similar, I kind of struggling to explain exactly how it like hit me, because like I think that early on in the book, like you do kind of feel that, and he still reads as like being a very real to life person. Like we've all known a person who, maybe they were told in early parts of school that they were gifted and really smart, but they were always like, they skated by early on intelligence and charisma, and then eventually once the workload becomes a little bit more real, they flounder a bit because they don't really have the inherent work ethic built up yet, because they just skated by on being smart. And so you kind of think early on in the book that like, oh, that's who this is, and that's why he's so bitter, is because he's probably above average intellect. He talks about he's fairly well read, he seems to understand things fairly well, but he seems lazy, right? We think. And I definitely felt like I knew him. Like I was like, oh, I know a lot of guys like this, that like they can't kind of get out of their own way, but it's really because they don't really want to apply themselves, and they probably are gifted or talented in some ways, but just don't have the drive. And that's kind of who I thought this was. And I was like, yeah, of course he's cynical. Like that's the kind of person who thinks the entire world is inherently BS because they can't just like arrive in the way that they think that they are destined to do, And that's kind of who I thought I had him figured out as, until a bit later. And I think maybe that's kind of who you're supposed to think he is, or that's a probably what turns a lot of people off to him initially too, is like, oh yeah, this is just a classic, slightly above average intellect burnout that can't apply himself because, he doesn't have work ethic or whatever, Um, so in a way, like, even if that was the novel, it's still written in such a way that like that comes across as so real, it doesn't seem like a exaggeration,
It also feels a bit like it feels like he's rebelling against his hyper successful parents and the golden child older brother that was a gifted writer and went to Hollywood to write movies. And now his brother's a phony because he writes movies.
Right. It's dumb movies,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And his dad's a dumb lawyer or whatever. I can't remember. I think he's a lawyer. And so it kind of feels like that as well for a bit, like that rebellion against expectations. And maybe there is a bit of that, or it's an excuse to like hide behind that. Because then we see like some pretty self-destructive behavior, like as soon as he leaves school. And at first, I'm like whenever he's on the train and like he lies about who he is and like has this whole conversation with this woman, that's like the parent of a classmate, that kind of feels like that arrogance of a burnout. But then as soon as he gets to his hotel, because he wants to hide from his parents, because he doesn't want them to know that he got kicked out of school yet, it turns pretty dark really, really quickly. What did y'all think about that whole scene with the elevator attendant and the elevator attendant's moonlight job?
Yeah. Will, do you want to speak to that?
I love that you guys are just throwing it around hot potato style. I mean, so just to set the scene, obviously he goes up in the elevator. The elevator attendant is like, "Hey, do you want a lady of the night to come up to your room? It'll be $5, right? Or 10 for what, the whole evening or something? $5 for an hour, something like that. Yeah, I don't remember.
$5 a throw."
Yeah.
That language.
And then he's like, yeah. So, and he's obviously at a really like interesting impasse, right at that stage of the novel where he's just kind of like throwing caution to the wind and just like, screw it. Let's just do it.
And it's important to note too that like, because I intend to connect this to a broader theme that I think that we can even connect back to Playworld, the last novel that we read, in that he's talked about previously in the novel that he's in high school, he's a teenager, but he has friends around his age that have already gone all the way with girls before, and he hasn't, but he's gotten close a couple times. He talks about it, and he kind of feels like a little bit of a societal pressure or some sort of imposed external pressure to behave in this way so that he can, like, I don't know, it kind of feels to me like a forced coming of age sort of a thing, which is a theme that persists throughout the entire novel. Is like he's kind of trying to make himself into an adult before he's ready for it, And so, yeah, I just wanted to double click on that a little bit just to add some context that, he has friends and he's been around his friends when they've been, they've already, gone all the way. So he's kind of a little bit pressured into feeling like he wants to catch up.
Right. Yeah, and the whole time, he's just kind of in his head, and then she arrives at the door, and then it just kind of descends into this like really awkward interaction, and where he's like, I don't even want to do this anymore, and it just becomes, I'm skipping over a lot of details here, so feel free to fill me in, but like you can see obviously this was a impulse reaction, and when the rubber hit the road, he realized this is not what I need. I have some things I need to work through himself. He's this sudden realization of himself, and like, oh man, and he kept talking about how depressed it made him, and just like and really kind of just like put into perspective that he was searching for something, and he realized that this was not the answer, and he didn't think he knew at that point what the answer was. So yeah, Jensen, give me your thoughts on this.
Yeah, it's when I was reading, like, and he says yes, and he's waiting for the prostitute to get to his door, and he's like nervous and excited. I'm like, okay, let's see what happens. He is a minor, like lying about his age. What is going to happen? Kind of expecting like things to like this to be like, oh, this is why this book is controversial. And then it really turning like really, I don't know, it was very, very sad. Like whenever he gets to that moment and he's like, oh my God, I can't do this.
It's a step in what is, I think, to me, that was actually a pinnacle moment. Because up until that point, he's like smoking cigarettes like crazy. You know, he's just trying to get drinks everywhere. He doesn't really care. He talks about being depressed, but he's still going through with it, right? He's still going to bars, trying to like get, you know, go get a cocktail, calling up people. He's just in this almost like manic state. And then he like, and you know, and it like leads to what could have been like a very like, okay, this is incredibly adult, and like this is a situation that could have a lasting change in your life. You know, smoking cigarettes and drinking drinks, like whatever. Like, yeah, you can make bad decisions when you're doing those things. Well, not smoking that so much, but you know what I'm saying. Like, you know, you can get past that to a degree. But like, this is something that she'd really have to like live with, and it would probably be someone at his age have a pretty substantial impact on his life. But he decides at that point not to go through with it, and so that was for me when I started to see a different. The book was starting to shape a little bit differently for me. When I was talking to you about like a critical moment, it was that scene where I was like, oh, okay. Because had, to your point, Jensen, he just gone through with it, then I would just been like, oh, it's just debauchery. Like this whole book is controversial, and just because it's like, you know, a young kid, like, you know, just living a hedonistic life in New York City, you know, like this is the controversy. And then I started to see he's unraveling. Like this is all part of his like spiral. And then it started to make a little bit more sense.
It's almost like he's grasping for adulthood in all of these kind of more like transient ways, like the appearance of adulthood. Things like, you know, riding the train by himself and talking like an adult, and lying about his age to get drinks at bars, and going to jazz clubs and smoking and doing the whole thing. You know, he calls people on the phone, and he almost talks with this like almost like out of body like maturity, like, because he seems to think that the whole world is just full of phonies. It's all BS. None of this means anything. We're all just like playing a role, and you can almost see like shades of like, you know, none of this has any meaning anyway. But as soon as he gets to something that like actually is very real, he can't, he like kind of shirks back from it. Like he's not willing to commit fully to the idea that nothing has meaning. There's still like something in him that is pushing him into this, you're not ready for this world yet. Like you think you've got it all figured out. You think that you've kind of worked out that like all the adults are lying. Everything is just about people posturing for position and all this kind of stuff. But you think you got it figured out, but you don't. Like you still have an inkling of that childhood innocence, maybe you want to call it, or, you know, just some sort of an overarching moral sense that like, this isn't the person that I want to become. Like, even though I am acting in this way, probably out of, like you already kind of said, a defense mechanism. It's a very interesting way for Salinger to kind of drive that point that like he's not ready for this world yet, and he knows it.
To your point too, that scene is also when he has, I would say, his first real consequence as a result of his decisions, right? So, like I said, he's drinking. He can kind of he just gets out of these bars. He just basically is told no in some of these situations, and not a lot like shifts his narrative perspective. In this situation, he literally gets the shit beat out of him.
Yeah.
And
yeah, because the elevator man comes back up, and he doesn't want to like actually seal the deal with this woman that he's hired, and so he just offers to pay her so that she'll go away, and she won't accept the money. She wants more money, and he said, well, he told me it was $5. She's like, well, it's 15 now. And then the pimp essentially comes back, and they get into this whole argument about, well, we agreed that it was this amount of money, and again, he kind of has like that assured sense of like order, like, well, you told me that it was $5. Like, this is the way it is, right? Like, like the world still has rules, even though we're, living, in this BS universe. Like, there's still rules, right? And it's like, no, there are no rules. Like, you're not ready for this world. And then, yeah, and he gets the crap beaten out of him as a result of not paying up.
Yeah. I also thought there's that one line. I was trying to remember exactly where in the book this was so I could read it, but where he talks about her having like gone and bought this nice dress, and they not knowing that it was like what she was going to be wearing when she was like, out in the town. And I just, there's something very just like very dark about that. Just that one line. It really just started to, again, this is where things really, it wasn't just about like going out and being free and being a rebel. Like, he was starting to analyze like these details of these things that he was like encountering at this point, and it started to just like create this like sense of realization for him, or at least the way I read it was this is when he really started to see like, oh man, the world is to your point there, there's consequences, and there's this sense of injustice, like
Right.
And then you go ahead.
I was just going to say, he mentions too that like this woman doesn't seem to be like that much older than he, and she's lying about her age too. So like there's kind of like an interesting dichotomy there where it's almost like a foil to him is like this like you think that you're living in the world of like the underground, and you've got it all figured out, but like this is what it actually looks like.
Right.
Like this is what can happen to you, like when you're actually vulnerable and you are actually unprotected by some of the privilege and stuff that he's protected by, being this rich private school kid that like can kind of play act at being this downtrodden underground kind of guy. But I thought that was kind of an interesting detail.
100%. So is it shortly after that he goes on the date?
Does he go on the date? Yeah, he goes on the date next. Because he starts calling people, and I feel like this whole scene, or like this whole like string of chapters, I think paints a picture of someone who is profoundly lonely.
Yeah.
Just like can't be alone with himself and is constantly calling somebody, trying to get somebody to be there with him. And yeah, so then he tries several people, and then he calls the girl for the date.
Just before that, when he like is in the bathroom, and like has that like scene where he like pretends he got like shot in the stomach or something. What did y'all take of that? Like how did y'all read that?
Well, for me, it kind of went back to this whole idea of like the way that he can conceive of like the adult world is still through like cultural snorkels. Like he can only really like he's almost like dramatizing his own life in a way that he can understand it, which I think just kind of more so pinpoints his still childlike nature. Is like, you know, he still thinks this is a game in a way, or at least that's the way that he can kind of conceive of everything that's going on, is still through the lens of fiction and drama. And it's, for me, it made me sad. It just made me feel like, oh, this is still a kid who just got like beaten up by a pimp, but like he's kind of making himself feel better by pretending like it was a gang or like a mafia hit or something.
Yeah.
You know?
And you know, you say, I think the cultural snorkel is like an amazing analogy, by the way. And,
I stole that from David Foster Wallace, by the way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
That's why it was so good.
Yeah. I was like, damn, dude, trademark that. But no, it is ironic that his brother writes movies.
No, for sure.
You know, like, and there's that's probably not an insignificant detail, or just a little bit of symbolism to that. So
Yeah, I mean, there is a kind of a concurrent theme throughout the novel that, like, you know, pop culture sorts of things are impressing upon him in this, you know, in the same way that they impress upon us now. And I feel like maybe when this book was written was like really towards the beginning of what we would really understand as being of pop culture existing. Because like before that, like, you know, the silent movie era and stuff, I just feel is like less, maybe less significant in how it shapes the way that people perceive the world around them, you know? Like as you start to get into the golden age of film, you know, right around the time of this novel and you know, a decade before, is you start to have like the first like real experience outside of the novel of being able to insert yourself into the life of somebody else. Because like you know, books were the only, you know, storytelling, you know, that was the main medium for this sort of like, I don't know, transcendence before films. And now that films have become like the main cultural thing, like it's an interesting idea, and it kind of goes back to this idea of play acting as an adult. Is like he's so influenced by the culture that he sees through movies and stuff that it shapes the way that he actually tries to put himself out into the world, you know, which I think is really interesting, and is probably like one of the first times in history that would have been like possible, I guess. Maybe not possible, but like as significant, you know. That, at least that's how it hit me. I don't know, maybe some film or cultural critic would have a counterpoint to that, but that's just how it impressed upon me.
I thought you were about to say something, Jensen.
No, I had the thought while you were saying that. It's funny to talk about how influenced he is by the advent of, you know, films being like a cultural staple, while saying that he hates movies, and talks about like he doesn't like actors that are too good because they know that they're good, and then it ruins it. So, and I started thinking if that is actually a coping mechanism for him, because, you know, we've mentioned already that like he is processing a trauma, and he has to scoff at the films, because if he doesn't, then they may make him feel something, and if you let a feeling in, then the walls will break down and the floodgates will break.
Yeah,
And he's holding back against that.
I think that is definitely part of it, and also that he seems to think, at least to himself, that the thing that he hates about the world is that everybody is pretending to be somebody that they aren't. And actors are like the pinnacle example of that. And that's why an actor that knows he's good, it like breaks the fourth wall for him, because that is an actor that knows he's acting, you know? And that's like, to him, like the biggest form of like inauthenticity. Because everything about this is like trying to find authenticity, you know, in a way. And I think that that's an interesting point, Jensen, that like that might be why he pretends to hate these films, because he doesn't know how to disaggregate acting for entertainment and people in the real world that are just acting like they're a good person while they're really terrible, you know, and stuff like this. And like, this is what I was thinking about when we were talking about the whole Mark David Chapman thing and of it all, you know, is like, what was the significance of phoniness to these people? Like, that's what's interesting, is like all the people that were really negatively influenced by this novel, that was the thing that they keyed in on, was phoniness. And I even think Mark David Chapman had written the word phony in his book, like in reference to John Lennon and all this kind of stuff. And it's the idea, you know, essentially it's the idea of pretending to be somebody that you actually aren't. It's inauthenticity that like really gets these people going, which is an interesting idea, because literally every single person in the world is pretending to be a little bit better than they are, or they're pretending to be a little bit different than they are. We're all posturing in some way or another, and that doesn't necessarily make us inauthentic so much as it does just makes us a social, like an individual in a social species that has to, you know, we need to be around other people, and those people need to like us. And sometimes that means that the deepest, darkest things that we think, we don't say out loud, because we, even if it's because we're pretending to be better than we are, it may not even be that deep. Sometimes it's because we know we can't trust our own thoughts. Like sometimes we just have like an intrusive thought that we know isn't us authentically, you know. It was just, you know, because we didn't have breakfast and we're feeling really bad. You know, we didn't have a cup of coffee before we left for work, and so now everybody is pissing us off on the road. Like we act inauthentically in those senses too, when we decide not to have road rage, even though we feel like we ought to have road rage in that moment, right? And so it's an interesting, it kind of strikes me as like a very naive way of thinking about the world, is that if people would just be what they really are all the time, then we would have, like, you know, a better society or a more ordered society or whatever. And it's just kind of, it's funny because for Holden, this is what we would expect for a teenager to think. And this is why it makes sense coming from him. But then coming from adults that are influenced and then use it to justify atrocity, it doesn't quite hit the same way. It feels very naive and immature, you know. Not
Right.
that I'm trying to like rationalize and intellectualize insane people, which I'm not. I'm just, you know, more so trying to understand why the novel has gained so much cultural significance negatively, you know.
The easy thing to point out how insane. What was the guy's name that killed John Lennon again?
Mark David Chapman.
It's obvious that guy was insane, because if you're going to kill a Beatle that's being a phony, you kill Paul because he's really fall.
Because he's the fake. Yeah,
he's the fake
the real Paul died in 1963 or whatever. Yeah, you have to listen to A Day in the Life, and then you have to listen to there's, I think, I Am the Walrus. You listen to it backwards. I read a whole blog in like 2002 about that.
This is like this podcast is just becoming breadcrumbs for conspiracy theorists.
Yeah,
you know.
Well, and we're referencing like conspiracy theories that are like so out of the zeitgeist now. But when I was a teenager, like that was a big one on the internet, was like Paul McCartney is really an actor and he's replaced the real Paul who died. And it's really funny because it's like, wow, dude, not only did they find an actor, but they found one that wrote like the album Ram. Like they found a musical genius to replace Paul. Like what luck. It's like you're telling me that the guy that replaced Paul McCartney, who wrote, Yesterday, one of the greatest pop songs of all time, the guy that replaces that guy wrote Maybe I'm Amazed, which is another amazing pop song. It's like that's incredible luck.
Yeah, if there's doppelgangers like that for all of us, maybe we just need to go and let them
I guess
live our legacy.
Maybe they would say that like George Martin wrote all those songs and it's all a conspiracy anyway, but I don't know. It's that's a fun one.
Yeah. But I mean, to kind of like to your point too, Taylor and Jensen, like Holden toward the tail end of the book starts to come across. He reaches a pretty important threshold, right? Like he starts to realize that maybe there are some parts of not to skip too far to the end. I don't want to jump there if we don't want to get there yet. But just how valuable some people actually are to him, and he starts to sort of pull back those layers a little bit. Unlike what you were saying was, and he's a kid, and unlike what you were saying was, some of these adults just still hold on to that phoniness and never grow up, and then they radicalize to some degree, right? So,
yeah,
I do want to
go ahead.
Yeah, I want to key in on two interactions that happen after his ass whooping by the pimp. That really that really demonstrate like the, for lack of a better word, childishness of Holden. And it's the date he goes on and the proposition that he makes, and then his conversation with his former school buddy when they meet at the bar. Those two things, I think, are really exemplify what we were just talking about with viewing the world in this kind of childish sense, and that proves that you're not really ready for adulthood. I'll quickly run through the date, and then we can talk about the meeting with his old friend. So he meets up with this girl that he had gone out with before, and he takes her to the movies, and then afterwards they go skating, and then after skating they're sitting down, and he's kind of peeing an ass, and then throws out that they should run away together and move into a cabin, and he'll work at a gas station as a mechanic to make money, and they'll live an authentic life out there. I'm sure, I know that I've had that same dream before as a kid, like, oh, I'm just going to run away and live in the woods, and I'll figure it out. I'll hunt for my food, and I'll be free.
Yeah, I was thinking about that like yesterday.
The second one, I'll ask y'all's thoughts, but the second is he meets up with that guy who's gone off to college now, but he went to school with the previous school that he also got kicked out of, and they sit down for a drink, and he starts asking the guy about his sex life in a really crass way, and the guy's like, "Shut up, Holden. If you're gonna act like this, I'm gonna leave." And he was like, no, I'm serious. Just like, tell me, like, how many girls are you sleeping with? You got a lot of girls? And so, and then finally the guy leaves. But again, a very childish view of what male relationships talk about. I'll give you one from my childhood. I played football in middle school, and I played one season. And I remember standing out by the water horse. If you don't know what that is, it's this labyrinth of piping that they hook up to a water hose and turn it on. You just drink out of water from the water hose coming through these PVC
it's a
pipes.
bunch of PVC pipes that have holes drilled in them.
Yeah. So we're standing by the water horse, and we were almost done with practice, and one of the other football players says, "Oh man, as soon as I get home, I'm gonna do my homework, and then I'm gonna get some pussy."
Oh.
And you almost be like, do you know what that means?
Yeah.
Spell that.
But like that, I guess maybe, especially like if you, there's this like idea that like locker room talk is like among men is constant and pervasive. And so whenever you're an adolescent boy and you want to feel like an adult, you, I guess you try to imitate what you think men talk about.
You
Yeah.
default. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think you're onto something with that for sure. And I mean, that's how that scene read to me as well, was like almost like an exaggerated version of what one would imagine the real men are talking about. And it's interesting because this character in question is a couple years older than him, and Holden kind of thinks of him as like an intellectual. I think he's still in college, or he's, early in college. He's probably like 19 years old, but he's, kind of into philosophy and is, Holden is like interested in these concepts, but he almost like doesn't want to broach these topics because he can't get out of his own way of his own like trying to sound like an adult so that this guy will like take him seriously. But like the sad thing about that, which we can kind of feel as readers, is like if he would have just been like, hey, so like tell me about your thesis paper, like what's that all about, like they would have had a great conversation over a scotch, and you can almost feel that in that chapter of like, man, if you would just drop it and just be you, be the person that you actually are. Because like Holden, like in his inner monologue, is constantly talking about being interested in books, and he's read all of these history books, and he's read X and Y and all this stuff, and he's clearly smart and he understands stuff and he wants to talk about it with people. He wants to have intellectual conversations, quote unquote, right? But like once he's in a position to like really like bond with a dude that's older, maybe a mentor, and have a real conversation about something real, he doesn't let himself just be vulnerable and be himself. He feels like he has to wear that mask of like cynic slash, crass adult, which is exactly what it feels like when it's like, it's, you know what it is? It's like youth group kids swearing. Like that's what it feels like. If it's like that sketch from I Think You Should Leave, where Tim Robinson is at the ghost tour, and like anybody that knows the reference, I'm not going to quote it because there are obscenity laws in this country, maybe, but this isn't the radio, so you can get away with it. But for those of you that haven't seen the sketch, go watch it if you don't have a sensitive stomach to just ridiculous dialogue. But the idea of it is that he goes to this, Tim Robinson goes to this ghost tour at this haunted house. And the host says, this is the, after hours adult tour. It's probably like 9:00, so we can say whatever the hell we want. And he kind of like leans into, and the rest of the adults kind of laugh like, oh yeah, it's no kids allowed on this tour. So Tim Robinson takes that as he's going to interject every swear word that he knows into conversation with this host. And it makes everybody incredibly uncomfortable. He uses words completely out of context, like he's never used them before. And then like the real punchline of the sketch is that, he gets kicked out of the tour, and his mom comes to pick him up, and his mother's like this elderly woman in a car with like all these like like Christian like icons on the dashboard, and she's listening to like an old hymn in the car, and she's like, did you make any friends? And he was like, not really. And like that is what it feels like, is like it's the youth group kid that gets kind of let out at the Barnes and Noble at the Mall of Georgia, and is just gonna try on some cuss words. You know?
I think this has to be the first time I think you should leave and the Catcher in the Rye have been used in the same description.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's what keeps people coming back to the pod,
Yeah.
man. Idiosyncratic references.
Yeah.
But that's what it strikes me as is because in a very real way, in a not so joking manner, is like the youth group kid that's trying on cuss words is, you know, a sheltered kid that is attempting to appear to be a bit more rough than they are, and they don't have the cultural context for the things that they're saying, just like the kid at the water horse that Jensen talks about is like it's performative in the very real sense. And that's exactly what the scene feels like.
So I was going to say performative. I was going to literally use that word because which is incredibly ironic in how he thinks about other people, you know, as not being true to themselves and just being phonies. And in this situation, he's absolutely putting on a front of, oh, I think this is just how we act among men, you know?
Right. This is what men talk about. Men don't talk about their thesis papers in philosophy. They talk about, you know, how many women they're hooking up with, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. All right. So Jensen, take us past this conversation into the date.
Well, the date I think is actually happens before, but like I got caught up on the conversation with the older classmate. I don't really have anything else. I'm curious what y'all's thoughts were, because like I said, that idyllic runaway from responsibility, kind of childish dream of like, oh, I'll figure it out. And it just shows that, like, one, I think that he is obviously running from something, and it's not just like having to do his schoolwork. There's something more going on here, because I think if she would have said yes, like, he would have left. I mean, they would have immediately come right back, but like, he would have gotten on the train or like rented a car or whatever and gone. But it's this very childish idea of like, oh, my problems will go away if I can run away and live an authentic life in the woods.
So just to make sure I have my like plot, like story beats correct, they meet that guy at the movie theater, right? First, like the guy that she knows, and then they go skating, right? And then they have this like conversation after that.
Yeah, that's correct? Oh yeah, you just remind me. That's why he's being a dick to her. After they finish skating, they're skating at the table because he gets insecure because she has a male friend,
right?
And they chit chat, and he feels like he's got to puff up his chest and prove that he's a man,
right? Yeah, and so, which is what I was gonna say, was I think that whole kind of like chapter is, you know, those insecurities coming full front and center, and him realizing he doesn't have a whole lot to offer, and trying to almost use this like you know, devil may cry rebel like lifestyle, presenting that as like, oh, but I'm even more man than him, we could just go do this, and you know, it's this is the real authentic life. You know, he's a phony, he's just a fake, like we could go like live off the land like you said, and I'll make it work. And just this posturing of, I've got it all figured out, you know. And yeah, that I read it as absolutely as just insecurities flooding to the front, you know. That's all I saw, at least.
Yeah, I finished the book a few weeks ago. Somebody couldn't finish the book on time because they were moving or whatever.
Hey, not me. Couldn't be me.
Now, Taylor, did you have any thoughts about that date?
Not as many. Other than it felt to me like another of these instances of like this conflict between his true kind of tender-hearted self, and this kind of penchant for grandiosity, which does seem, like I've already mentioned, like kind of a performative way of proving how grown up he is, you know. And so many of these interactions in the novel are that thing. And you know, running away to live in the woods is a romantic ideal that I feel like all of us kind of feel that we can um, gravitate to on bad days, because it's, you know, the idea of escapism into an authentic world is something that hits particularly hard today. This is why I think the novel is still relevant, is that um, what's interesting is, you know, it's been however many decades since the novel came out, and we're still kind of dealing with similar issues of coming of age. You know, it's kind of interesting how the problems of trying to become an adult have remained more or less constant, regardless of however many decades are intervening. And I think it's universal for that reason, is that we all kind of have this idealized vision of what an authentic life could be. And it's interesting how that authentic vision is always so pastoral in nature, you know, just living off the land and, you know, being a railway bum, or, you know, for in my case, you know, a traveling folk singer, you know, all these pastoral ideas of like an authentic life. And reality has a way of kind of checking that in a lot of ways, because there's more responsibilities than one is often able to notice right off the top like that. And so for me, it was like a lot of innocence, still childlike innocence, but that feeling of I remember how I was when I was in high school, because it doesn't really feel like all that long ago, where I had very similar idealism, where I wanted to find the real authentic thing, you know. We all had this sense that, like, regardless of the decade that we grew up in, that everything around us was all BS. It was consumerism. It was, you know, all, you know, it was just people wanting all the wrong things and pursuing all the wrong material things, and, you know, all this kind of stuff. And um, I found it more so interesting that has just remained a prevalent theme in human existence for this long. And as we find out, the more that we read, and, you know, a lot of the novels that we've read together have been a couple hundred years old even. This is a central facet of the human experience, that we all feel that something isn't quite right, and that there is a more right way that we could be living, but we don't really know how to get there. We don't know what it is, and it's always kind of idealized. And I don't know, there's something kind of nostalgic about that. There's something kind of sad. You know, I read somewhere recently that, like, this has been coming up in the discourse because the Odyssey film just came out. And so people have been talking about and revisiting the Odyssey, the Homeric poem. And within this discourse, somebody mentioned that the word nostalgia, like, we kind of think about it as like this backwards looking, just thinking about the good old days sort of a thing, which is sort of how we think about it today. But I think that the word really means like the longing for home, and that sort of feeling really inhabits this book. I feel that, like, he's yearning for something. He doesn't quite know where it is or what it is, but as we sort of start to discover, it's that loss of childhood innocence in several different ways, which I think kind of gives it a different, sadder, more human tone.
Right. That's spot on. I mean, and that kind of takes us toward the tail end of the book, right? Where he is spending a lot of time with Sophie. Sophie is her name. Is that right? Did I make that up?
His
It's
sister.
Sophie. His sister?
Yeah,
I want to.
I don't remember. Well, I mean, this is also the point in the book where we start learning a bit about Allie. Is that his?
Phoebe.
Okay, but
Phoebe.
like, yeah, we start also getting nuggets of stories about his other sibling. So, you know, he's got his little sister, Phoebe, his older brother. That's the the movie writer and the screenwriter in Hollywood.
I think.
Yeah, and then he actually had a younger brother that was older than Phoebe. And we start getting nuggets of stories about him. Will, do you want to take it from there?
Go for it. Go for it. Go for it.
Yeah,
This
you're
is
on a
yours.
roll.
So it's stories about like, so after he like, he's already like checked out of his hotel, and so he doesn't really have anywhere to stay. He's running low on cash, and so he starts walking through the park, and it's cold because it's near the end of the fall semester. It's near Christmas, and he starts remembering snowball fights and playing in the on the playground with his little brother, or taking him to the museum, and you start to notice that this brother, it's always past tense, and it's because his brother died, which seems to be the crux that we are working towards in this novel, is him dealing with the death of his little brother. And he gets to this point where he decides that he is going to run away, because he's gotten kicked out of school again. He doesn't want to have to face that with his parents. And so he decides he has to see his little sister one last time, and goes to visit her. And they have a conversation. I'm just going to kind of glaze through a few things. And then he has to sneak back out because his parents get home, and he has to sneak out away from them. And he calls up a former teacher of his that kind of mentored him. And he gets there, and they were partying late, so they're still up because it's pretty late at this point. The teacher's pretty drunk, and he's trying to like mentor him. And finally, like Holden goes to sleep, and then wakes up with the teacher sitting on the floor, kind of caressing his head, and he freaks out and runs out of the house. I'm going to stop the synopsis there and open it up for you guys to talk about whatever I've just walked through, because there's a lot of shit that I just covered in a couple of minutes.
Will, go
Taylor,
ahead.
go. Now I want to hear yours. You go first.
So, my initial impressions of this can go a couple of different ways, but as I was reading it, I don't know what you guys think, and I don't know if I just like was reading this too fast and like it just hit me in a different way, but did you guys feel that the teacher was like potentially like
Like a
on the
predator?
verge of like being a predator, like taking advantage of him a little bit?
Well, that's what Holden thought. And
Right.
I kept asking myself the question, was Holden correct? Was this teacher a predator, or was it a fatherly head caress? Because
But either way, it speaks to something deeper, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if Holden's acting like that.
So that's how I read it, is I wasn't quite sure how to parse out the teacher's actual motives, but it seemed to me that it implied that Holden had been taken advantage of before in his life and had the defense mechanism already built up for that sort of interaction, which gave a whole other layer to what's going on.
Well, also the other thing that was a little just potentially telling was the teacher says "Goodnight, handsome" before he falls asleep. And I mean, again,
whenever he wakes up, he says, and Holden says, "What are you doing?" He's like, "I'm just appreciating."
Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
yeah, and it felt really weird to me. Like,
so it felt really weird to me, but within the for me, that whole sort of like experience felt out of left field. Like I was like not. To me, I was like, this doesn't feel like the time in this story to introduce this. You know, like I then I was just like, this is a completely different thing to unravel at this point, because if he was dealing with grief and then he also is like an assault survivor, then like a victim, then then yes, he is dealing with a lot of trauma. He's working through a lot of trauma, which would explain a lot of his manic kind of personalities. It's also interesting too.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
My last point is just to double down on that a little bit is like, when he's talking with his colleague, the guy who's a little bit older than him and getting a drink with him, he's like, you need to be psychoanalyzed, like just basically telling him, dude, you need to go look at your mental health. Like
you need therapy, bro.
Yeah, you need to get yourself checked, dude. So yeah, I don't know, but yeah, for me, I was like, oh gosh, like I just didn't anticipate like this sudden layer of story, and like something he had to work through. Just for me, I was like, it came out of left field.
Well, and it doesn't really get addressed again.
No,
and I think that's kind of what I was going to say is like that's what I feel, to me, in my opinion, what elevates this novel into like great novel territory is that it's so non-explicit with what you're supposed to feel and get out of it, and it leaves a lot for you to just kind of experience. And I feel that a lot of novels nowadays, or even just like lesser novels in the past, they'll like really double click on that hyperlink there and be like, he's been molested before, and he's going to tell you a story about it in the next chapter, and that's going to color the way that you read the rest of the novel. But instead, I think Salinger is kind of smart to kind of like float this idea out there and then let it kind of dissipate and let you deal with it the way that you want to, because that's kind of how Holden is internalizing these experiences. Is like, he doesn't even know, because the book is told in Holden's perspective, and so it's almost like he doesn't even know how to interpret these things yet. For wherever he is in the future, speaking back and reminiscing in this novel, like, he's not even really comfortable telling you exactly how he felt in the moment. Like, this is a character that has like pretty much never not told you exactly what he thought about something all the time. Like, that's kind of what's jarring about this section of the novel, is like the whole book is just his stream of consciousness of like, this over here is BS. This guy over here is clearly faking it. This guy over here, look at all these phonies, and look at all, my vision of the world and this and that. And he's got every detail memorized. And then as soon as you get to this part, it's like, this is what happens. And then boom. And like, it's just interesting to write it that way, that like even he hasn't quite worked it out.
I just realized something, because it is in Holden's, it's first person. The novel is written in first person from Holden's perspective. This is classical, like psychology of a victim, of an assault of that kind. Where like, particularly among boys, there's a bit of guilt and shame as a victim, that they don't want to admit to themselves or relive. And it's something that obviously that someone like Holden would never admit even to himself.
Well, and even
which just makes it more clear that it makes it more clear to me that that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, I think so too. And just to piggyback off of that, is this really explains his sexual issues throughout the entire novel. Because I mean, not to like go complete Freudian on it and like try to psychoanalyze a fictional character, but like, I have a feeling that that's kind of partially what Salinger was trying to do. But this character is like hypersexualized in certain ways, where he speaks in highly sexualized ways, uses like very crass language. We're talking about already with the conversation with his former classmate, where he's very crass and asking way too detailed questions, and they're kind of probing questions too, like almost trying to understand sexuality from a adult's point of view rather than a child's. And the fact that he continually clams up around not only just the prostitute, which is a little bit more understandable, but like he's kind of talked about he's clammed up in previous situations as well, and you start to think about it, and you're like, man, I wonder if that's just not an part and parcel of having your innocence taken in such a way,
Well, he was even struggling after he left, was like, well, maybe I should have gone back. Was he actually doing that? And just,
Right.
he was like kind of like hedging his own decision making, which I think is also a telltale sign of him, something happening, a very adult thing happening to him in his past, and he doesn't know the signs of being like taken advantage of.
Yeah,
and like
he can't
you
like
mentioned,
disaggregate that. Yeah.
right. And so for him, he's just like, his like fight or flight, probably, his like deep, conscious self says this is not right, but him not having experienced enough of the world doesn't really see the reality of what's happening. And so he's even toying with his own mind, like fighting against the reality of his own brain, where he's like, no, this is bad, or he's like, oh, was it? I don't know. Was he actually going to do it? I don't know. And he's just like, and also looking for comfort in people and not realizing that sometimes there's people who take advantage of that. So,
Absolutely. And it also just kind of reinforces his already existing worldview that like everybody out there is pretending to be something that they aren't. And like, this character, this teacher was pretending to be this like mentor with a stable marriage and a well-ordered human like adult life, but
literal
really
savior of a kid.
yeah, but really he's
know?
a predator, or maybe he's a predator, or he could be and I mean, it seemed to me like maybe he was, and it's just really sad because it's another facet of the novel, and this is kind of why I wanted to read this one, almost as a companion piece to Playworld. Is both of those novels speak to this idea of like what happens when the adult world fails children, like when we put children into adult situations that they're not like mentally or intellectually or emotionally equipped to deal with, what it does to them, and this has happened in both of these novels where adults do not understand that boundary, and they creep too close to the line, or they cross the line, and the fallout that can occur from those sorts of things. And I think it's very interesting, like as a companion to Playworld, because I know that the author Adam Ross of Playworld was he talks about Catcher in the Rye as being one of the books that kind of inspired somewhat indirectly the retelling of his own childhood in a way through Playworld. And I thought that was an interesting thing to read at the same time.
100%. 100%. Should we take us home on this one?
Yeah, just just to sum up the rest of the book, because like after this event, he decides he is gonna run away, and so he wants to go see his sister one last time. So he goes to school and tells the lady at the front desk to give his sister a note, like, hey, meet me at lunch over here. And he tells her that like, hey, I'm leaving. And she says, okay, I'm going with you. And he's like, no, you have to stay. And like she shows up to the meeting with a suitcase, and is like, no, I'm coming with you. Let's go. And then that leads to him finally saying like, no, never mind. I'm not going anywhere. We're both staying. Let's just go to the museum. And then I actually like went back to the beginning of the book after I finished, because we find out that he is telling this story from a sanatorium in California, because he had a mental breakdown, and is committed into a mental institution to receive treatment. And so like I flip back to the beginning of the book, and like he mentions like being somewhere, like I've been out
Right,
here,
yeah.
and And I think talking with you guys again, like fleshing out some of these themes, has given me some empathy for Holden that I didn't have when I finished the book. Like right after I finished the book, and I was like, my thought was just like, "Good, you need to be in a mental institution. Like you're up, dude. You need some help." But like that was like the extent of my feeling. But now like talking back through it and thinking through that lens of not only just like dealing with trauma and loss, but like also being a victim of assault, like, and not having a mental framework or ability. I mean, I don't know if anybody could ever like really have a mental framework to deal with those things. So I feel much more empathetic, and I feel bad for him.
I would second that. Just the fact that, like I said, when I first read this, when I started this book, I was like, "Where's this going? Like, what? I can't. How do I feel for this character at all? He seems unredeemable." But then the layers were unraveled. But even now, like you said, after this conversation, I'm like, it was actually all there. The signs were all there. In a way, like, not to just toot our own horn, but like this is kind of what a book club's all about, because this is, if someone was to read this book and not have anyone to talk about it, and just went to the internet and just started Google, like, what is the common thesis of The Catcher in the Rye and public opinion, they might just find other people who did the same thing and didn't really like dwell on it. Not to say we've cracked any code or anything like that, but just like this is really helpful in just framing up the story, because it helps me a lot, like just
three buffoons stumbling blindly through literature and every now and then tripping over some truth.
Yeah. Well, and I also I wanted, before we transition topics a little bit, I want to talk a little bit about the title of the novel and where it comes from, because I think it's emblematic of what everything that we've already talked about. Phoebe, his sister, asks him at one point something to the effect of like, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And he says, "The Catcher in the Rye." And it's basically his. I was kind of doing some auxiliary reading on the title, and apparently he's kind of misinterpreted a line from a poem in which he thinks that this idea of being the catcher in the rye is basically saving childhood innocence, being the person that can rescue children from the world. And at first you kind of think about that as, oh man, yeah, like he's grieving his younger brother, like he wants to protect that innocence. And it's like that's kind of what I thought. And then it's like, oh, that's actually just sort of it's not ancillary, but it's kind of a projection of the real deep-seated issue, which is protecting his own innocence that was stolen too. And I think that like double meaning really, really hits hard, particularly with the ending of the novel and what ends up happening to him. Again, just like I was more impressed with the novel after having, gotten to talk to y'all about it and like really thought a little bit harder about what was going on, instead of just, one could just read it as a stream of consciousness and go, oh, the bitter kid doesn't live up to his expectations, oh, his brother died and he goes insane. And it's like, oh, man, there's a lot going on under the surface of his complaining, and a very fitting title, a very brilliant symbol of a child essentially misreading into a poem meaning that isn't actually there, but he finds the meaning that he needs to find in the line, which is very interesting when we're talking about this particular novel, which has had so much meaning read into it that isn't actually there, you know? I don't know. I don't think that J.D. Salinger could have possibly done that on purpose, but there's nothing more emblematic of the power of a literary work like this that you could have a detail like that, like one of the characters literally misinterpreting something to find meaning in something that isn't there, than for it to be in this novel that has become like the literal symbol of finding meaning that isn't there. Not that there isn't meaning in the novel, but there's plenty of meaning that isn't in this novel,
Right.
and I just, if nothing else, that makes this completely brilliant and well worth a read. And I wasn't really able to put that together until having this conversation. So, man, it's great. It's a good book.
If you guys do a quick, just talking about like finding symbolism and things, one of the things I just thought was, yeah, again, this could just be me piecing something together that wasn't necessarily intended to be read this way, but the scene where Phoebe is riding on the carousel, and it just like there's a downpour, and all the adults go and huddle underneath like the edge of the carousel, and he sits on the bench and just like lets the rain fall. Like a part of me was like as we were having this discussion, it's sort of like, okay, maybe there was some more to this. I sort of read this as like, the kids are riding this form of like childhood excitement, this joy. They're going around on a circle of childhood excitement, and the rain starts to come down, the hard part starts to come down, and the adults go and huddle under this almost like facade of childhood.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's not intentional that this is toward the tail in the book where he sits in the rain and lets the rain hit him and actually ends up experiencing greater joy as a result of it, because he's like, I was so happy. Like he was just like he like finally addressed the experience of life to a degree, where all the other adults tried to hide underneath this sense of nostalgia, to your point, right? Or this is like this like fake creation of child, this almost
safety
like
of child,
the safety of child.
safety.
Yeah. While he sat on the bench and just experienced it and then ended up feeling some sort of real joy. So I don't know if there's anything there necessarily, but it just felt.
Yeah, I didn't read it that way.
Mm.
Which is an interesting reading of that moment. Again, remember it's December. This is the end of the novel. Like he is full blown in the throes of his mental break. And so I didn't view this as him like finally finding like a moment of joy and acceptance. This is the little, like, if you could point to a specific moment where like he completely comes apart, it is there. And he describes it as joy whenever it is not joy. It is literally him coming unglued.
Well, but that's what I'm saying too, is it's like him coming to terms with reality. Well, like, and in this sense, all the other adults are hiding underneath the facade of, they're hiding, they're basically literally shielding themselves from it. And this is like, he's basically saying like, this is my turning point, right? Like to your point, right? Like, I'm not saying like he was necessarily so happy, but more so that he had come to some sort of acceptance of like, I need to get through this. Like, I need to just embrace this.
It is interesting too that like the embrace of that as an image is ultimately, it breaks him. And it's tough because it's like, I don't know exactly what Salinger is saying there, because like clearly that is a image that he's trying to impress upon us, that like that obviously the innocence of childhood, in a carousel. Like, I mean, literally the cover of the novel is the carousel horse, and so that this is a central image, and the adults huddling from the elements under it could represent exactly what you're saying, like, maybe nostalgia, maybe even, this trying to run back to the perceived safety of childhood or whatever, and him saying, I'm going to sit out here and like really come to terms with reality. Like, it does destroy him though. Like he doesn't come out on the other side. I mean, we don't know what happens to him. Maybe he goes to the mental institution and gets treatment and he is fine. Like, we don't know. Like, but it certainly precipitates the the final like negative impact of like everything, which is sad because maybe it wouldn't have had to have been that way for other people, you know. Maybe he's the person because of his past and what has happened to him that he was literally unable to come to terms with reality like in a healthy way. Could be that. I mean, it could also, I kind of read it a little bit as like a stubbornness of like trying to prove that he was the real adult, you know, like I'm going to sit out here in the rain and like experience the real authenticity of what the world really is. And I'm not going to take shelter under this, you know, childhood facade, you know, and that could break you too, maybe. Like maybe you need a little bit of both. I don't know. It's
Yeah, y'all
it's
thought
hard
about
to
that
say.
much more deeply than I did. I think when I first read it, I just pictured him with swoop bangs and eyeliner.
Listening to My Chemical Romance.
Yeah, I was gonna say the
Yeah.
used in in his earbuds. Yeah.
Mm. Did anybody have any like parting words for the actual narrative before I transition to not a different topic but a different idea that I had?
The only thing I was gonna say was just that last chapter. I was like, "There's no way this book's gonna end in 2 pages." I was like flipping, you know. I was like, "There's no like, there's no chance." Like, was there a sequel to this? But no. He literally just like it just ends. And that was like jarring for me at first. And at first I was a little bit like pouty. I was just like, okay, that was kind of cheap. You know, like that was just really cheap writing at first. Like it just ended. But then I realized, I mean, I think if you think about it, like that would honestly be the actual probably response of a teenager who just want a mental breakthrough. And he's like, I really don't want to talk about it, but like, you know, yeah, this is like, you know, yeah, we're gonna figure it out. I don't know, you know, he just like he kind of skips, you know, glosses over that. It just felt a little like I was like, okay, I guess the book's done. Here we are.
And I kind of feel like in real life that's sort of how it is sometimes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Which for me it just made it hit harder. I kind of was glad that it didn't really resolve and it just sort of ended. I think that it could have been really cheesy if this novel resolved like Crime and Punishment, you know, resolves where Raskolnikov is in prison and he has like a come to Jesus moment and like turns his life around. And a lot of people like really criticize the epilogue of Crime and Punishment for being like too on the nose or whatever. I love that novel, but I don't think that this novel would have worked if he was sitting out there in the rain and then the parting image was him, you know, going under the merry-go-round and, you know, healing. Like it just wouldn't work. You know, this isn't real for him, you know?
Yeah, it also doesn't work to picture seeing him get better in the mental institution either. Like, and it's obvious that he's not better yet because this story is being told by him. Like he's writing it down like in his room in the mental hospital. And he ends with talking about like his brother comes and visits him. He is not better yet. And I think that it would also cheapen the novel if you tagged on an epilogue of like, oh, and then I got better, and now my life is, you know, happily ever after.
I live in the woods and I work as an auto mechanic and everything's great. You know?
Well, and just the reality that yes, you might heal, but it doesn't fully close all the time. And I think that in a way that sort of like to your point, cheapens the trauma that he went through. Like yes, you will get better and time will heal your wounds, but at the same time, you'll always have that like sharp knife that like you'll feel it for the rest of your life. That's the reality, you know?
Yeah. But I mean, this isn't a coming of age novel. This is the story of someone's fall into madness.
Or at
we
least like temporary madness,
maybe madness isn't the right word, but it's like that fall into like his mental break, which appropriately starts with him getting kicked out of school, and then that descent into that final breaking moment that does finally send him into the hospital.
Yeah, and man, it's heavy. It hit me really hard. I found myself completely changing my opinion on this character at the end of the novel, which is kind of what I imagine that a lot of people don't make it all the way to the end of the novel, like people that really hate it. And they haven't really maybe talked to their friends about it and figured out what was going on, because I wanted to transition to a new segment that I want to call 1-star reviews of classics, just to kind of for one reason, because it'll be fun and funny. I found 1-star reviews on Goodreads. I'm not going to read like people's usernames because I'm not trying to like make fun of individual readers or anything. I just I think it'll be fun to get like a general idea and impression of like how polarizing this novel is and what people really hate about it. Because that was all that I kind of knew about it before reading it. And then having read it, found myself like, did we read the same book?
Yeah.
So here's just like a couple that I found that I thought were funny. Like this person said, well, that was a pain to get through. This one says, a spell in the army would do this young man a power of good, or maybe a couple bags of heroin. Anything to stop that whining voice. That's pretty funny. This person says, the most overrated classic, in scare quotes, of all times. I don't give an F about your opinion. Worst book ever. A sore disappointment. I couldn't see what all the yelling was about. This person just says, I don't like the main character, not my type of book. Abandoned. This person marked it as abandoned, like they didn't finish it. So that's interesting right there. So I just, this is really funny that like this person said they didn't finish at page 48. So it's like, oh, no wonder you didn't like it. Like you didn't get to read the book. You probably thought that like the rest of the 200 or so pages was just going to be this dude complaining about nothing for the entire thing.
Yeah.
It's just really funny. This person just says Jesus wept. But I just think those are funny because it's kind of it kind of gets at. I did this when we didn't do this on the podcast, but when we all read Moby Dick together a couple years ago or whatever, I read 1-star reviews of that one too, and a lot of them, it's just funny to see like what people like and don't like about books. It is funny to me though with this novel that I do think that if people give it a fair chance and actually finish it, for one thing, you have to finish it. I mean, you don't have to. You don't have to do anything. If you don't want to read the book, don't read it. But if you think that it might be enriching to understand what all the fuss is about, there's a lot to discover in this novel. I was very surprised to find that because, like I said, I kind of expected that I was going into a very early postmodern stream of consciousness. Everything is BS. Teenager that hates everything, and it was only interesting because at the time nobody wrote like that. That's kind of what I expected. But there's a lot going on under the surface of this novel, and I think that is why it is often taught in high school. Maybe it's not taught well in high school. I can't speak to this from experience because, like we already talked about, I did not get to read this in high school. But I did have some very good English teachers in high school, so I predict that if we had read it, I would have gotten a lot out of it because they would have explained it to me very well. Not everybody has the benefit of a really great English teacher like I did, but I think that the book gets a disservice. I was really surprised by what was going on under the surface, and I think it has well earned its spot as one of the most acclaimed of the 20th century American novels. I think it's really good. That's my 2 cents.
So how many stars would you give it?
I mean, for me, it'd be like, so this is my scale of rating. Like I never give almost anything 1 star. Like even the books that I read that I just find tedious and pretentious and like have nothing to say and are
Like Moby
aesthetically
Dick.
ugly. No, that's a 5 for me.
Tedious.
But like, I mean, I'm thinking of like really crappy like book. I'm not even gonna say what because everybody likes different stuff. But I've read some books that I hate and I think have almost no redeeming qualities and are aesthetically ugly and are poorly written and have, a plotting plot that makes no sense and stupid dialogue and stilted prose and all the rest of it. And those novels to me still get a 2, because this is how I rate novels. Like I'm very similar with novels as I am with songs. So like the highest praise from me with a song or a novel is, oh my God, I wish I would have thought of that.
Mhm.
Like, oh God, how did I wish that I could do that. I wish that I could have done that. So that's like the top for me. And then 2 is like, well, you finished a novel and I haven't done that. So you at least get a 2,
Yeah.
And then a 3 is like, that was fun, but like I'm not going to think too hard about it. I'm probably not going to think about it again. A 4 is like, that's great novel. Like I'm going to think about it really hard. There's going to be conversations that I'm going to have with people. And then 5 is like perfect. But the 4 and 5 are both in the realm of like, I wish I thought of that territory often. So this novel for me would be like, in the 4 range. It's not a perfect novel. It's not my absolute favorite aesthetic, prose wise, like there are prose writers that I like better, personally from an aesthetic point of view or whatever that just resonate with me different. But this is as good as, anybody could hope to write. Like, you know what I mean? Like just for me, objectively, it's written very well. It's got a lot of underlying themes that are subtle and give you a lot to think about and stuff to revisit, which is everything that a great novel does. So that would be it for me.
Let me just say, I think your scale is 100% accurate. Like I think that is an incredibly great scale, and we should start dropping our at the end of each of these, because I think that's totally true. I would agree. I'm the same way. I think about books and songs and movies like almost when you're watching it, you're like, oh, yes, like I already like I know, like this is so, I could see the end, like in really good movies, like a really good movie. It's not that I know what's gonna happen, but I'm just like, everything makes sense. Like, oh my gosh, of course, like this is just so well written. It all flows so well. Like I can see like how you piece this story together, and I just have that sense of just like, you nailed it. Like you just absolutely nailed it. Like you totally hit that. You got this one right. So I would agree. And I'm also the same way with like when you think about art too. Like I always think about people who go to galleries and look at like really simple paintings and they're like, oh, I could have done that. It's just a couple lines on like a blank canvas. And then they're like, well, you didn't.
Yeah,
Like
you did.
You don't have a piece.
At least a 2.
Yeah, you don't have a piece of art in this gallery.
Yeah.
Like so. But I like your scale. I would give this one personally probably like a 3.8. I would say 3.8. So
that's literally what I was thinking.
Really?
Like
Yeah.
using Taylor's scale of 3.8
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah.
Where like this is a damn good novel. And maybe like I haven't read enough books to like push it up to a 4. But I have read 3 Dostoevsky books, and those are all 5s for me.
Right. Yeah. That's kind of my scale. Yeah. Like the 5s for me are things that like just tick all of my personal boxes, and also they have to be things that I wish that I would have written, that I wish I was smart enough to write this.
Yeah.
I think 3.8 is pretty fair. I always just think in whole numbers and don't really do decimals, but I guess I could. So yeah, but I think a 4 is fair, particularly because of cultural significance and enjoyment factor.
Yeah.
There's also this thing that I think that like you guys, I think about whenever you read those 1-star reviews and kind of the discussion I have with my wife, because I'll tell her the books that I'm reading, and she's like, "That just sounds so depressing. You read depressing books."
Yeah.
And this, I think there's this like the marvelification of entertainment has made people believe that enjoyable art has these beautiful monolithic one-dimensional perfect heroes that you can like get behind and cheer for, like that's what makes good art, whereas I actually think it's the opposite, because if you really want to identify with a character, they need to be dirty and broken and flawed. And the really good authors can create that character that is broken and dirty and flawed. And they're flawed in all the ways that you are. And you find yourself identifying with the character and not liking what you see. Those like the ones I think about in particular in that particular scenario are Notes from Underground and Crime and Punishment, where all of those things that we hate about the narrator in Notes or in Raskolnikov, you'll hear them speak, and it's like, oh yeah, I definitely agree with that. Yeah, that's right. And then you have to then go, oh, yep, that's the conclusion that comes from thinking that way. Maybe I need to think about that a bit.
Yeah. No, I think I understand what you're getting at. And I think too that there's always going to be a separation between like why you are seeking entertainment. And some people like to read entertaining things because they like the act of reading more than they like watching TV maybe. And so they want to read something that is as propulsive and fun as TV shows can be. But TV shows can also be super dark. And, I think, like True Detective feels like some of the novels that we like, the first season, could kind of feels like a Cormac McCarthy sort of a thing, right?
It's incredible.
Like there's different things happening in different mediums, and people tend to, like I've read books that I don't think are like particularly edifying in any like intellectual way, but they're just fun, like I don't know. And I don't even, I hesitate to even like name stuff because I don't want to like denigrate stuff that people enjoy. But, I've read a lot of fantasy novels that like, I'm not reading them for philosophical insight or for socio-political commentary or anything. I'm reading it because it's fun. There's magic, and there's a hero that's going to beat the devil, and it's going to be cool, and there's going to be battles, and there's nothing wrong with that either. It's just I found myself more so now just craving a different type of entertainment because of what you were saying, Jensen, that like pop entertainment has become so kind of one note often. And this isn't true for every single thing, but I know what you mean about like the Marvelification of, dialogue and moral sensibility or whatever being very kind of black and white and on the nose, which I think there's a place for. I just have found myself resonating less with that sort of stuff as time has gone on, just because I want to sink my teeth into something a little bit more. And I think that this is the sort of a novel that this is another thing that goes into my grading system that was very put together as I was talking about it. I haven't thought very deeply about my grading system, but one thing that goes into it is like, is there something for me here to like really sink my teeth into, and will it reward me for the more time that I spend interacting with it and interfacing with it. Like, will a reread give me more color than the first read? There's plenty of books out there that are not written to be reread. This is the type of novel that I think would benefit greatly from a reread every 10 years, or maybe less, and all of my favorite novels are that way. Like the Brothers Karamazov, I feel like I've read it like twice a decade since I was like in my early 20s, maybe since I was like 21. And I get something different and new, and like my life experience has like grown up with the novel, so that I'm able to kind of see a little bit more of myself in a different character this time, or I'm able to understand what somebody is saying more so now than I did when I was 21.
Right.
For me, that's what I'm looking for in novels these days. But I understand what you're saying about.
I was just gonna say, if I was gonna add to this conversation just a little bit, two things I'll say. Like one, like I think the Marvelization is not necessarily a fair treatment of like just comic books in general, because they're generally escapism. Plus, there is like some flawed characters, that they make, of course. But to your point, Jensen, like I think there's a lot of like, there must always be resolve. Like they'll never really just like sit with the tension and like let something be heavy.
Somebody's got to make a fart joke as soon as someone dies.
Yeah. Or just it's just like, there's always a sense of there's always has to be resolution, because that's just the natural like story arc that a lot of comic books tend to follow, right? What I will say is, one of the things I love about books, to your point, Taylor, is, and when you talk about mediums, comparing movies versus books, a movie, by nature of the medium, is finely tuned to give the audience a specific reaction. So you're talking about like the cinematography, the color grading, the dialogue, the actor, the look. Like there's a director and editor who work tirelessly to make sure that when a specific moment happens and is seen on screen, you experience something very specific. What is really interesting about books is, because it is words on a page, that is the only way for the author to communicate with you. And so you in your brain are constantly translating with your own experiences. And basically, you talk about like you're literally hallucinating. You're building a movie in your mind as you go. You are the director in that sense, right? Like you are the editor. And so that's what's really powerful about books, is because it gives you the power of the editing room to a degree. You are the audience, of course, but then you're also just like reading and internalizing that. And I think that's what makes books so interesting, and how you can read the same book twice but have completely different perspectives, just because your own life has changed a little bit. So a thought.
No, you're right about that, and I think that I just wanted to piggyback off of that and make a slightly different point, which is, I think if we're just talking about the importance of reading, like, I'm not even gonna go so far as to like, well, no other medium is capable of this type of interaction or whatever, because there's plenty of other types of immersive mediums that people can experience this sort of thing with. But if we're just talking specifically about books, I think in our day and age, something that's very important is, so much of like the culture that we're constantly inundated with is kind of presented as more of a conversation. So social media particularly is, the medium itself is centered around communication. So when somebody posts a hot take or posts any sort of analysis or something, it is intrinsically linked to the fact that it will be a conversation piece. That's why they all have comment sections. So, some people are trying to elicit comments by saying something controversial, but regardless of what the intent is, there is this intrinsic property of it being a conversation. In a book, you are not you're part of a conversation, so insofar as you are a recipient of it. You're part of a conversation across time with people from different cultures and different times in the world that are communicating something to you, but you can't talk back. You don't get a say. And I think that's a very interesting thing, and is potentially why books have become so uncomfortable for a lot of people, when they don't. And this is what a lot of these comments, these 1-star reviews or whatever on a lot of books will show, is like, a lot of people are very unhappy that the author isn't telling them the thing that they think, or reflecting the society that they live in to the degree in which they think it ought to be reflected. And I just think it's an interesting thing now that this is one of the few mediums that you do not get to clap back. You just have to sit with it, and you have to take it for what it is. And of course, like, there's extraneous mediums like this where one can comment on these sorts of things and have a conversation, but I just mean the very act of reading is very interesting in that way, that it's one of the few things that we have in culture, in popular culture, where we don't get to immediately respond. And maybe that's good. It's actually, I know it's good. Just unequivocally, I think it's good to just listen to a different perspective occasionally and try to see if you can make sense of it, or find a little bit of yourself in it.
Yeah. Also, you can't read a book necessarily with someone. You kind of have to read it by yourself. You can watch a movie with multiple people. Like, that's kind of the experience, right? Is a communal movie theater. Not to say that, like, that's a bad thing, because I love the part of the experience of watching a great movie like The Odyssey is to be with other people and experience it together, right? But for the act of reading is it's by yourself, and it forces you to read, and unless you have a book club or something, where you can kind of talk it out, right?
Right. And this is, we're making the case for why the book club is a fixture that needs to be brought back into the common existence. Is more and more people are doing it these days, because I think that there is a desire to communally work your way through something like this. And it's interesting what you said, that, like, I don't try, at risk of, like, donning my media critic hat and getting into media theory and all this kind of stuff. I do think quite a lot about this kind of stuff. Just I pretty much feel like it's going to become a meme at this point, that, like, every time I mention the book Amusing Ourselves to Death, we're going to have to, like, donate $10 or something to a charity, because I do it so often. But I revisited this book again this year, and I tend to try to read it all the way through, or listen to an audiobook of it, like, once a year these days. But in Amusing Ourselves to Death, came out in 1985 by Neil Postman. It's a nonfiction book about kind of exactly what we're talking about, that the mediums that we transmit information through, they change the information by its nature, by the nature of the medium. So I was just talking about how social media, you can present any form of communication in social media, but it will always be colored by the fact that it is a intrinsically communicative medium. It is always colored by the fact that there is communication happening with it. Television makes everything entertaining intrinsically, and the things that aren't visually or audibly entertaining, they don't last on television, because people don't want to watch them, because that's what television is. So when things show up on television, they have to be entertaining. So this is why, I mean, not to put too fine of a point on it, but this is why politics is the way that it is, throughout the latter half of the 20th century. It all starts to skew towards entertainment, polarization, things like this. And now we're in the social media age. And so you think about, like, how politics or anything else would, when you bring the power of that medium to bear down upon that thing, how it changes it intrinsically. And so this is just one of the nerdy, like, fixations that I have with reading, is, like, it's one of the few things that if we, as we're in the moment of reading, and not when we're discussing it and doing the podcast or whatever, but as we're reading it, we we have to take it for what it is, you know? Like and I think that there might be something healthy about that mentally. Um, I don't know if I'm just rambling about that, but it seems important.
Yeah. I completely agree. I completely agree. I have no notes. No
Sure.
notes. Yeah.
Both
Another
of you guys
plug
have
for
me,
amusing ourselves to death.
Yeah.
yeah. Both of you guys have me like wanting to walk back like my initial statement, kind of on the books that have a different purpose from like the things that we've been reading to an extent. Because I have had this conversation several times with a few different people about like the medium of books like serving different purposes, just like you said, Taylor. Like sometimes you read just because it's fun, and I don't necessarily I don't have a problem with that. Like there have been plenty of books that I've read that I read them because they're fun, not because they're like edifying or challenging in a particular way. And I think there's a place for that. But I do have a problem with someone like one starring a great novel because it's not that.
Right. I see what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that kind of gets back to my initial point was like I think it's frustrating when you've been socialized in a attention economy that has created algorithms to maximize the amount of time that you spend pissed off like constant, like really, like we found this out like through court hearings that like basically the algorithms are optimized for polarism, and often that is negative. Is polarism a word? I don't know. It doesn't matter. You know what I'm trying to say.
Well, like you said, it's the attention economy, and so the algorithm boosts things that get engagement, and because humans are smart, and if you want to be important, or at least in terms of social media, to get engagement, you have to say something salacious, which leads to the polarization. Like nobody gets famous by being rational. If you want to get 1 million likes, you have to be a bit salacious.
Right, because you need a lot of people commenting on something to boost it through the algorithm, and the best way to get people to comment is by saying something that a lot of people disagree with, or is equal split if you can manage it. That would be the best thing that you could do, and then you can get people arguing in the comments, and then that just boosts you even more. I mean, I know it's kind of ironic. I don't know if ironic is the word, but we're going to post all of this on social media and just like completely buy into the attention economy. So I'm not even trying to make this like broad-based, like everything on the internet is bad and social media is evil or anything like that. I was just trying to kind of get at the idea that it's important to have some parts of our daily life, or at least like our our weekly or monthly life as it comes to reading, that aren't so focused on things that are directly curated to your exact taste by a machine that does not love you.
I just had an idea. Do you remember in Talladega Nights whenever they're reading all those ads for all their sponsors for their car?
God, I haven't seen that in a million years.
I know. I just rewatched it, or I fell asleep to rewatching it a couple of weeks ago. But it just this gave me the idea. Yeah. Well, because it's so old. I've seen it so many times. I can quote half of it. Rote memory.
Growing up in Jackson County, that's pretty much a documentary, I think.
But there's this one ad. They're reading all these different ads, and there's one. I think it's like KFC or something. But like, they're holding up a bucket of chicken, and they're like, "If you don't like KFC, then you." So like, I think that the title of this episode should be If you don't like Catcher in the Rye, then f- you.
Just like, hey, that'll do great for the algorithm. That'll do great
Right?
for the algorithm.
Yeah, I have found just having posted the announcement that the podcast was going to be covering this, that there are a lot of people on the internet that hate this book, and they are not shy about sharing that. So I don't even think we'll need a attention grabbing headline for this one. I think just the title of the novel will do enough.
Yeah.
Cool.
It
Let's
was really
talk about.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
I was going to say, let's talk about what we're going to read next.
Yeah. Would love to. I'm really excited about this one because it is actually this one I hadn't read before. But the next one is also a book that I haven't read before, and most of the novels that we've covered, one or all three of us have read at various points in our life. So this is going to be doing something a little bit different, is going into something a little bit more blind. But my personal favorite translator of Russian novels, Michael R. Katz, who I believe is a Russian language professor at a university. I can't remember which. I should have done some research before I just decided to speak extemporaneously about the translator. But he has translated most of Dostoevsky's major works, including Notes from Underground, Crime and Punishment, The Brothers Karamazov, and Demons. I've read 3 or 4 of his translations, and among other translations that I've read of Dostoevsky, and I really love his translations. I find them to be very readable, and just found myself gleaning more information from his translations than others. And he has just released a translation of Dostoevsky's novel, The Idiot, that literally just came out last week. I've been like, this is really kind of like nerdy and funny, but this has been like my most highly anticipated literary event in like a long time, because I love this translator so much, and he hadn't done The Idiot yet. And The Idiot, and I've been waiting, because The Idiot is the one Dostoevsky's like major great work that I haven't read yet. I have a copy of it, and I read like the first chapter years ago and found out that this was coming out, and I was like, I'm just going to wait. I'm going to put it off because there's only a finite number of Dostoevsky novels, and I'm just going to wait for the translator that I know I really like to release his version, and then I'm going to dive in. And we are all going to do that together. So this is going to be a big book. It's not as big as some of the other Dostoevskys, but it's going to be a little hefty. We're going to read it in parts, as a lot of these novels are in, part 1, 2, 3. So for the next episode of Shelf Destruct, we're going to cover part 1. At least that's the plan. I'll pop up on social media or something if I find that we have bitten off more than we can chew on that, but I think that that'll be pretty reasonable. So, The Idiot by Fyodor Dostoevsky, as translated by Michael R. Katz. Now, don't feel like you have to get that translation. There are a million translations, and I'm sure all of them are good at this point. I mean, a lot of people have their preferences when it comes to how to translate Russian and how to capture Dostoevsky's actual prose and all that kind of stuff. This is just my personal taste, what I tend to like. And I think I've read 4 different translators of Dostoevsky, and this is just my personal favorite. So if you feel so inclined, pick up the beautiful new translation by Michael R. Katz. It's a great hardcover. It's got a great art that fits in really well with I've got the Brothers Karamazov with the purple, and then I have the Crime and Punishment that has red, and they all fit together, and the Idiot is green, and they're just like a really nice looking aesthetically as a set. So I'm really excited to dive into this novel, having not read the entire thing. And what do y'all think? Are y'all stoked to bite off something a little bit more robust?
I think you're the one that told me that Katz was doing a translation of this however long ago, whenever it was announced. And for the past year, with our like personal book club, I've been saying like, as soon as this comes out, we're reading it. As soon as this comes out, we're reading it. And so I'm stoked that we're going to be reading it for Shelf Destruct as well. And I actually have the dust jacket right next to me. And so he is the professor emeritus of Russian and Eastern European Studies at Middlebury College.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Do you
so that's my
do you want to
Glorcats.
show the cover?
Yeah, I pulled it off my book because I read the translator note and part of the preface yesterday, and I don't want to tear up my dust jacket, so it's just the jacket, which is here.
I love this cover so much because that is like an interpolation of a really famous painting. I can't remember the name of it. Again, I didn't do a ton of research. I just remember having read this about Dostoevsky. He was very taken with this painting, and it borderline like incurred a psychological episode in him. It's a picture of the recently crucified Christ laying in a very like it's brutal and sad, beautiful painting. It's one of the greatest paintings of all time. And I love that attention to detail went into the dust jacket. That's just like a well studied cover. So I'm very excited to dive into this one. What about you, Will? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I've no expectations either way. Like, excited just to read something different. Typically, when we go and do Dostoevsky, there's a lot of pretty rich discussion that comes out of it. So we'll leave it at that. So yeah, stoked for this. It'll be nice.
The literature nerds are going to eviscerate us for like butchering the interpretation of this book.
Well, I don't care. I wanted to. I was you had mentioned that as soon as you found out that the translation was coming out, that we were like, oh, we're going to read this. The way that I found out that this translation was coming was like literally on a message board, like not Reddit, not like it was like an archaic message board where somebody that spoke with cats, who's elderly, he's like in his 80s and he's still a professor. He had said, oh yeah, I'm working on a translation of The Idiot. And this was like several years ago, and this person posted in the message board was like, it's coming. And we were like, yes. So yeah, this is an exciting moment for me and anybody else who's weird. But I'm stoked to dive into this one with you guys, especially going in blind. I really don't know much about this novel. I know like I've done some like ancillary reading about it just through my other literary reading, but I'll be going in pretty much blind, so I'm pretty excited about it. We will, just in case you have been on the edge of your seat, we will still be doing an episode of interviewing the author of Playworld, Adam Ross. That is still happening. It's just been a crazy summer. I'm not going to pretend like we're super professional here. It's just been crazy. We've been traveling, switching jobs, moving houses. Adam has been in and out of town. And I just genuinely have not had time to make that happen, but we're going to, and it will still happen, and it will be fun. So if you still have any questions for Adam Ross, please hit us up on social media, send those in, comment here on YouTube or on TikTok or wherever you happen to see us pop up, and I'd love to ask him some of y'all's questions too, so that will still be happening. I think that's all the housekeeping that I had for today. Anything else, guys?
It's always a pleasure, boys. Glad we still doing this, even though we had a busy summer. But yeah, we'll get into The Idiot next. I'm stoked.
Couple idiots read The Idiot next time on Shelf Destruct. See you guys.
All right, later.
Shelf Destruct!